They pushed my gift aside like it was trash, laughed at it, and seated me in the very back of the hall where no one could see me. But when my son opened the box, when the truth spilled out in front of everyone, the laughter died so fast you could hear breathing. None of them expected what I had put inside, or what it would reveal about my son's past. I never imagined that my only son's wedding day, the one moment I thought would heal the distance between us, would be the day I felt the most unwanted. I had replayed this day in my mind so many times. Me sitting in the front row, him smiling at me with gratitude, everyone treating me like family again. Instead, I walked into a decorated hall full of people I barely recognized, and every step reminded me that somewhere along the way, I had become a stranger in my own child's life. The air smelled of flowers and expensive catering. Soft music floated in the background. I arrived early, gift in hand, a small wooden box wrapped in a simple white cloth. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't glittery, but inside it was decades of sacrifice and a truth I had carried for years. My hands shook slightly as I held it, but they were hands that had worked hard, loved deeply, and held my son through every storm of his childhood. I thought he'd remember that. I thought he'd understand. The first person who saw me was a tall woman in a navy dress, his fiancé's aunt, I think. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe with a polite but cold smile. "Oh, you must be Michael's mother," she said, stretching the words as if they tasted sour. "They told us you might come." Might come? As if I was an optional guest at my own son's wedding? She pointed toward the far end of the hall without really looking. "Family is sitting in the front, but we've arranged a place for you in the back. More comfortable for you, I'm sure." Comfortable? The word stung. But I swallowed my pride and nodded. I had promised myself I wouldn't cause a scene. Not today. Not on his day. I walked toward the back table, a round one squeezed near a pillar, half hidden behind a floral arrangement that looked like it was placed there purposely to block the view. A few elderly guests sat around it, none of them I knew. As I placed my gift gently on the table beside me, I noticed whispers, glances. One woman elbowed another, nodding at my box with a chuckle. "Looks like someone brought a jewelry box from the flea market," she murmured, not quietly enough. They laughed. I pretended not to hear, but my ears burned. It wasn't the first time I'd been judged for not having the money his father's family flaunted. Michael had grown up with modest means, while I worked 2 jobs to raise him alone. His father had remarried into wealth and suddenly seemed to forget the years he'd spent sharing a tiny apartment with us. Maybe this wedding reflected that new world he lived in, fancy, perfect, pristine. A world where a simple mother with calloused hands didn't quite fit. I pressed my palm on the wooden box, grounding myself. It's not the wrapping that matters, I reminded myself. It's what's inside. Suddenly, I heard a familiar laugh, Michael's. I turned my head instinctively, heart warming the way it always had when I heard my boy's voice. He looked handsome, nervous, excited. For a moment, just a moment, he was still the little boy who used to run to me after school, waving his drawings in the air. But then he saw me, and his smile dimmed. Not disappeared, just dimmed, the way sunlight fades behind a passing cloud. Quick, subtle, but unmistakable. "Mom," he said, walking over, eyes darting around as though checking if anyone important saw him greeting me. "You made it," I said softly, forcing a smile. He nodded, but didn't hug me, didn't touch my arm, didn't hold my gaze for more than a second. My chest tightened. "Where should I put your gift?" I asked gently. "Oh, he looked at the box as though it were oddly out of place. Just anywhere." He gestured vaguely toward a table already piled with expensive, glamorous wrapping paper, silvers, golds, ribbons, bows. My little wooden box looked embarrassingly plain beside them. His bride, Emma, approached us then. A beautiful young woman, graceful and elegant. She looked stunning in her fitted white dress, though her smile toward me felt like the fragile glaze atop a ceramic vase, pretty but cold underneath. "Hello, Mrs. Carter," she said, her eyes flicking briefly to my dress, then to my hands. "Thank you for coming." Her tone suggested she was thanking a distant coworker, not her future mother-in-law. "I'm happy to be here," I replied. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we'll talk later, okay? There's so much going on." "Of course, later. Always later." They walked away together, side by side, leaving me standing alone among strangers. I sank into my seat, watching the room fill with people who seemed happier to be at the wedding than the mother of the groom was allowed to be. Still, I held hope. I always did. Maybe after the ceremony, when everyone had calmed down, he'd come sit with me. Maybe he'd finally talk about the distance between us. Maybe he'd tell me he missed me too. The ceremony began. Beautiful, yes, perfectly choreographed. Every moment seemed designed for photographs. I strained to see, leaning slightly around the oversized floral display blocking my view. No one noticed. No one cared. But I watched. I watched the way his eyes lit up when he saw Emma walking down the aisle. I watched the way he wiped a tiny tear from his cheek. I watched his lips tremble during his vows. And as he spoke of love and partnership and gratitude, I remembered a time when he used to say things like that to me. "Mom, thank you for everything. Mom, I couldn't have done this without you. Mom, I promise I'll always take care of you." Somewhere along the way, those promises faded like chalk drawings in the rain. The ceremony ended with applause and cheers. People hugged, kissed, clapped. I stayed back, waiting for the crowd to thin so I could approach him without embarrassing him. But every time I stepped closer, someone else intercepted him. A friend, a cousin, a flashy business partner. So I waited, patient, quiet. Dinner was served. They seated me last. The waiter forgot to bring me a drink. I didn't complain, not today. Finally, after what felt like hours, it was time for gifts. A wedding planner with a clipboard guided the couple to the large table with all the wrapped packages. A small crowd gathered, eager to watch the couple unwrap luxury. I slowly rose from my seat, heart pounding. Maybe this was it. The moment my son would look at me with gratitude, maybe he'd remember. One by one, they opened gifts: a designer coffee machine, expensive artwork, envelopes stuffed with money. Everyone oohed and awed. Then Emma's cousin pointed and laughed. "Look at this one. Who brought the little wooden box?" My cheeks flushed. Before I could step forward, a man I didn't know lifted my box and shook it jokingly. "It sounds empty." People laughed. I tried to speak, but my voice caught. I felt like a child again, small, powerless, invisible. Michael reached for it, frowning slightly. "It's from my mom," he said quietly. The laughter softened, but didn't disappear. Emma whispered something to him. He hesitated, then placed the box on his lap, unwrapping the cloth with careful but curious fingers. Everyone leaned in. Emma rolled her eyes. "If it's like a family trinket or something, we can put it somewhere discreet." More snickers. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. My fingers dug into the edge of the chair. Michael opened the lid. Silence. Real silence. Heavy, thick, spreading through the room like smoke. I saw his face freeze, his eyes widen, his hands tremble, his lips parting in shock. Someone whispered, "What is it?" But no one knew, because inside that box was the secret he had been too young to remember, and the truth his father had spent years hiding. Michael didn't move for several seconds. He just stared, as if the photograph and letter had paralyzed him. The chatter in the hall faded into a thick, uneasy quiet. Emma leaned in, eyebrows raised impatiently. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice sharp with annoyance rather than concern. He didn't answer. His fingers brushed the photograph first. The edges frayed, the corners softened from being kept in a wallet for years. He lifted it with the kind of fragile caution someone uses when touching a memory they didn't know they had lost. And before he even turned it around fully, I saw the tightening of his jaw, the way his throat bobbed as though a forgotten emotion had just slammed into him. Emma snatched the photograph, gently but firmly. "Let me see." But as soon as she glanced at it, her confused frown didn't match the way Michael's hands began to shake. It's just an old picture, she said dismissively, trending it toward the nearest guests. Why is everyone so tense? The picture wasn't just an old picture. It was a photo of a little boy, Michael, sitting on my lap on his 5th birthday. His face sticky with chocolate frosting, mine exhausted but glowing with joy. But the important part wasn't me. It wasn't Michael. It was the man standing behind us. A man Emma, and most of the people in that hall, thought was Michael's loving, present father. But in the photograph, the man looked very different. Younger, yes, but more than that, colder. His hand rested on my shoulder in a way that seemed possessive, not affectionate. And Michael, even as a small child, leaned away from him slightly. A detail subtle but telling. This was the picture that had once been hidden away by his father, then assumed lost by everyone else, except me. And now it sat in my son's shaking hands. "Why do you have this?" Michael asked suddenly, looking straight at me. Not angry, not accusatory, confused, hurt, afraid. His voice cracked at the last word. I took a breath, rising slowly from my seat. For the first time that day, all eyes were on me, not with disdain, but with anticipation. The truth was about to surface, and truth has a way of silencing even the most judgmental crowd. "It was yours," I said softly. "You used to keep it on your nightstand when you were small. You carried it everywhere." He blinked rapidly, like he was searching for that memory in some locked room in his mind. Emma tapped her fingers impatiently on the table. "Okay, but why bring that to our wedding as a gift?" Her emphasis on that made a few guests shift uncomfortably. My gaze slipped to the letter, the second thing in the box, the one his father had prayed Michael would never see. "Michael," I said gently, "please, read the letter." But before he could reach for it, a sharp voice cut through the silence. His father, Richard. He emerged from the crowd like a man stepping onto a battlefield he had hoped never to return to. His tailored suit, shining watch, and polished shoes contrasted sharply with the panic in his eyes. "That's enough," Richard snapped, his gaze burning into me. "This is not the time or place for whatever stunt you're trying to pull." A murmur swept through the crowd. Tension crackled like electric wires overhead. Michael looked between us, his eyes wide. "Dad, what's going on?" "Nothing," Richard said quickly. "Your mother is—" He stopped himself, catching the word dramatic before it slipped. But I saw it anyway. Always the same man, always the same arrogance, always the same belief that he could charm or bully his way into controlling every narrative. I stepped forward slightly. "Let him read it, Richard." Richard's jaw tightened. "Not here." Emma crossed her arms, clearly irritated. "Honestly, this is ridiculous. It's a wedding. Why are we doing this?" I looked at her, not unkindly, but firmly, because he deserves to know the truth. Michael shook his head slowly. Truth about what? Richard moved toward him, reaching for the letter. "Give that to me." But Michael pulled it away, his voice suddenly low and firm. "No." Richard froze. Everyone froze. My son, my sweet, quiet son, who had spent years folding into himself to make peace with two worlds he never understood, finally showed a spark I had prayed would return someday. He unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The paper was old, worn, creased so many times it looked like it had lived many lives. As he read silently, I saw the transformation. Confusion first, then disbelief, then horror. His breath hitched audibly. Emma leaned over his shoulder, reading along, until her hand instinctively flew to her mouth. Oh my God. People whispered, chairs creaked, someone gasped softly. I stood still, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with the painful relief of finally letting truth out of its cage. Michael's voice finally broke the silence. "This isn't real," he whispered, staring at the letter as if it were on fire. "Tell me this isn't real." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose, face pale. "Michael, son, this was a long time ago." "So it's true?" Michael shouted, the words echoing across the hall. His father flinched. Everyone watched. Michael looked at me again, a mix of betrayal and hope twisting his expression. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever say anything? A tear slipped down my cheek. Because you were little, because you adored him, because I didn't want to take your father away from you, even if he had already taken so much from us. Richard scoffed. Oh, please, you're twisting things. I cut him off, my voice calm but sharp. You left us, Richard. You left us with nothing, and when things went wrong, you blamed a 5-year-old. Gasps echoed. Emma looked horrified. Blamed him for what? Richard's eyes darted around, trapped. This is not the place. No, Michael said quietly. This is exactly the place. His hands clenched the letters so tightly it crumbled. Is it true that you almost had me taken from Mom because you didn't want custody, because you didn't want responsibility? You told the judge she was unstable just so you could get out of supporting us. A woman somewhere whispered, "Oh my God." Richard swallowed hard. That was 25 years ago. People were young, stupid. You told him I laughed, I said softly. You told him I walked away. You told him I abandoned the marriage. Michael's head snapped toward his father. You lied? His voice cracked, full of childhood hurt resurfaced. Richard rubbed his temples, stressed. I didn't lie. I reframed. Reframed, Michael echoed, laughing once, harsh, disbelieving. You reframed the fact that you kicked us out and married someone else a few months later? The hall buzzed with judgment now, not toward me, but toward the man who had always prided himself on his spotless reputation. He looked at Michael helplessly. I was scared. I didn't know how to raise a kid alone. You didn't raise me at all, Michael snapped. Mom did. She worked double shifts, lived in a studio apartment, skipped meals so I could eat. And you let me grow up thinking she was the one who wanted nothing to do with me? My chest tightened at the rawness in his voice. This pain wasn't new. It was old, buried, resurfacing like a bruise pressed after decades. Michael turned to me next, eyes softening with guilt. Mom, I'm so sorry. I shook his head gently. You did nothing wrong. You were a child. He wiped his face with his shaking hands. I treated you so coldly these last few years. I pushed you away. I really thought Dad was the one who stayed, and you were the one who left. I stepped closer, my voice barely a whisper. And I knew correcting you would only make you feel worse. Tears slipped down his cheeks freely now. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. Michael, she was always there. You know that, right? He nodded, swallowing hard. Then he held up the photograph again, his voice trembling. Why did he keep this from me? Why hide something so small? Because it wasn't small, I murmured. Because that day, the day that photo was taken, was the day he told me he didn't love me anymore, and he didn't want a son reminding him of our life. Another wave of whispers rushed across the hall. Michael pressed a hand to his forehead. I can't believe. Richard stepped forward, desperate. Michael, listen. I'm not the same man. I did what I had to. Your mother is exaggerating. Stop, Michael snapped. Just stop. You've lied enough for one lifetime. I saw it in his eyes then, the breaking point. The moment a child sees a parent's flaws in full, unforgiving daylight. He turned back to me slowly. Mom, what was the letter? Why did you give it to me today? My throat tightened. Because it's time. Because I didn't want to die someday with you still believing I abandoned you. Because I wanted you to know I fought for you. And because today is the first day of your new family. I didn't want it built on a lie. Emotion flickered across his face, a mix of gratitude, regret, love. I don't deserve you, he whispered. I shook his head. You're my son. You don't have to deserve me. You just have to know the truth. He stepped toward me then, slowly, as if walking through water. And finally, after years of distance, he wrapped his arms tightly around me. My breath caught. His shoulders shook against mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like his mother. Not a burden or an embarrassment, but someone he needed. People around us dabbed their eyes, shifting uncomfortably or watching with sympathy. Richard stood frozen, stunned, and powerless. But the moment wasn't over. because Michael pulled back, wiping his tears, and said something no one expected. Michael held my gaze with a steadiness I hadn't seen in years, not since he was a teenager fighting to understand a world that kept pulling him in two directions. Now, standing there in front of a room full of guests who had no idea they were about to witness the final unraveling of a decades-old wound, he looked older, wiser, and heartbroken all at once. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. So many truths, so many years. Where did I even begin? The rest of the truth, I said softly, is that what happened back then wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a battle over your future, even if you were too young to remember. The room went impossibly quiet. Michael loosened his grip on the letter, the pages trembling. "Tell me everything, Mom, please." His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was pleading, like a little boy still lost somewhere inside the grown man he'd become. Emma's hand tightened on his arm, grounding him. Her own eyes were glassy now. I swallowed hard, feeling years of silence press against my ribs before finally letting go. "After your father left us," I began slowly, "I didn't want you to feel like you were losing him too. I wanted you to have the life I thought he could give you, stability, a nice home, more than what I had. So when he asked for shared custody, I agreed, even though he had pushed us aside." Richard stiffened but said nothing. "But when the court dates came," I continued, "he changed his story. He said I wasn't fit, that I was unstable, that I couldn't provide. He claimed you'd be better off without me." Michael blinked harshly. "But that letter, it said he tried to get full custody." I nodded. "He didn't want us," I said, voice cracking. "He wanted to make sure I couldn't ask for support. He thought if he took full custody, he could hand you off to nannies, and I'd disappear quietly." Several guests gasped. Emma stared at Richard in disbelief. "How could you do that?" Richard ran a hand over his face. "It was complicated. You don't understand." "No," Michael cut him off. "We understand perfectly." I continued, my voice steady now. "But then something happened that changed everything." He looked at me expectantly. The letter alone hadn't given him the whole story. "Richard didn't win," I said. "The judge saw through him. He saw the truth about how we were living. He saw how much I loved you. He awarded full custody to me." Michael breathed out shakily, as if remembering tiny flashes of a courtroom he'd been too young to understand. "But Dad always told me you left because you couldn't handle raising me," he whispered, voice small. I felt my eyes burn. "I never left you. I never would have." He nodded, jaw trembling, then looked back at the box in his hands. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever show me this letter before today?" My throat tightened. "Because after the judge ruled in my favor," I said, "your father asked me for one thing, just one. He said if I allowed him to remain part of your life without fighting for support or reopening the case, he would never poison you against me again." Michael's eyes widened. "But he did." "Yes," I whispered, "but I didn't know that until you were older. By then, you loved him, and I didn't want to break your heart by telling you the truth." I took a trembling breath. "And because I believed, foolishly, that you'd remember on your own someday, the late night shifts, me walking you to school in the rain, me sewing your torn clothes, me sitting through every fever, every nightmare, I thought love would speak louder than lies." My voice cracked on that last word. Michael's face crumpled. "Mom." "I kept the letter," I continued, "because it wasn't just about the past. It was a reminder of how close I came to losing you." My voice trembled. "I couldn't give you money or expensive things, but I could give you the truth someday when you were ready." He pressed a hand to his face, tears slipping through his fingers. "And you brought it today?" "Because today," I whispered, "you're starting a family of your own, a future of your own, and no family should begin with lies." The hall was so silent, the air felt heavy. But then Michael asked a question that pierced me more deeply than I'd expected. "What about the years I pushed you away?" he whispered. "All the times I canceled on you, forgot holidays, didn't answer your calls, acted like you were just an obligation." His voice cracked. "How did you not hate me for that?" I stepped closer, lifting his face gently with my hand. "Because you were my child, and parents don't stop loving their children when they're hurting. They love harder." His chin wobbled, and he broke again, pulling me into a tight embrace. I held him firmly, burying my face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of the grown man who would always, in some part of my heart, be a little boy holding onto my hand. When he finally pulled back, he turned toward his father. Not angrily, not aggressively, but with a sadness so deep it silenced even the whispers lingering in the air. "Dad," he said quietly, "I loved you. I trusted you. But you made me believe Mom didn't want me. You made me think she walked away, that she was weak, that she didn't care." Richard swallowed, his proud posture deflating. "I was young," he muttered. "You made lies," Michael corrected gently, almost painfully. Lies that changed how I saw my own mother. A tear slipped down Richard's cheek. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was the tear of a man who had finally run out of excuses after a lifetime of creating them. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered. "I really am." Michael stared at him for a long moment. I could see the war inside him, the desire to forgive, the need for truth, the aching wound of betrayal. But then he shook his head softly. "Dad, I'll work through this someday, but not today. Today is my wedding, and I need to focus on the people who truly stood by me." Richard's shoulders dropped. He nodded, stepping back quietly. It was the first time in years I'd seen him look small. Michael turned toward me again. Then he did something that stunned the entire hall. He walked up to the front of the room where I was supposed to be sitting all along and pulled out the chair next to his. "Mom," he said, voice steady, "this is where you belong." A ripple of emotion washed across the guests. His gesture wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't glamorous, but it was everything. I hesitated, my heart suddenly unsure if I deserved such a place after being pushed aside for so long. "Michael," I whispered. He shook his head firmly. "You gave me everything, and I let lies make me forget that, but never again." Emma stepped forward, wiping her tears. "Please sit with us," she said gently. "You're family, and I want our children to know the grandmother who raised the man I love." That broke me, truly broke me. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. For the first time that day, I felt seen. Not as a guest, not as a burden, not as a shadow lingering on someone else's joy, but as Michael's mother, as someone who belonged. The ceremony continued, gifts forgotten, whispers fading. Michael held my hand as the toasts resumed, squeezing it every so often as if reassuring himself that I was still there, still real, still his. Emma's father stood to make a speech, but even he seemed moved by everything. "Family," he said, looking around, "doesn't start with perfection. It starts with truth." Later, as the music played and guests began dancing, Michael approached me again, this time smiling softly. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Thank you for loving me even when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved it," I said gently. "You just didn't always know it." He hugged me again, longer this time, stronger, and whispered something that healed a part of me I hadn't realized was still broken. "I'm proud to be your son." The hall lights glowed a warm amber, the music carried softly, and for the first time in years, I felt peace settle inside me. I watched him and Emma dance, laughing together, wrapped in the future they were building, one rooted now in truth, not deception. And I knew, deep in my bones, the wooden box, the one people had laughed at, had given my son a gift no amount of money ever could. It gave him back the truth. It gave him back her mother. And in return, it gave me back my child.